picked it up in a department store. It was back when they sold comic books in department stores. I picked it up, and I just opened it, and I just fell in. And I like to say that even though it cost 25 cents, I bought it.
Miller let his love of film and comic books guide him for the rest of his career. And now at the age of 50, he's the artist most responsible for the two mediums merging.
Comic books and movies are getting married. Or at least they're having a very turgid affair. Because they can connect and be able to borrow from the other. The feedback between filmmakers and cartoonists is just wonderful. And I'm noticing that the closer the movie people try to get to the source material, it does feel drawn. And then Gerard Butler's there with his shield and his spear glaring at you. There's nothing jarring about it. When Marv runs across the rooftops and the city rolls by in the background, it reunites the oldest tools with the newest.
Frank added one more staple to his diet.
I fell in love with crime fiction. Everything from Mickey Spillane to Dashiell Hammett to Raymond Chandler. I kept drawing comics. Then I moved to New York to try to break in.
Miller quickly hooked up with influential comics creator Neil Adams.
Neil was my mentor. He was very generous with his time. I simply called him up and asked him if I could show him my pictures. He'd pull out tracing paper and start correcting me. And then one day I came in and he just picked up the phone to Gold Key Comics and said, I got somebody for you. And he got me my first job. It was Twilight Zone Comics. I spent a week drawing every page. Usually that's something you do within a day. It was my first professional job, and I took forever on it. It was 3 pages long, and I took 3 weeks to draw it. But it's a start.
It wasn't long before Frank's pages caught the attention of Marvel Comics.
Frank Miller had done a couple issues of Spectacular Spider-Man, which had featured Daredevil in them.
Yeah, Daredevil was mine. I liked Daredevil because I was always doing characters that were flawed. And Daredevil had probably the biggest handicap of all. He was blind.
It became clear that was what he wanted to do, and so they gave him a shot at doing Daredevil.
Coming up, Miller takes on Daredevil, and what he creates will send shockwaves through the medium of graphic fiction. Icons travels to the Montreal set of 300, and later, Frank reveals the next comic book he intends to turn into a movie on Icons. Icons. In the mid-90s, after years of plotting and research, superstar comic creator Frank Miller put pencil to paper and began one of his greatest works, 300. His preparations included visiting the scene of the battle.
Visiting Greece is a fascinating journey back in time. It is true what they say, the stones speak. You can feel it. 300 it shows geography's role in war, and it's a lesson to be learned to this day. The planet's still the most powerful piece of equipment there is. Those cruel cliffs. I knew I was going to tell the story of 300 fairly early on. I waited until I became a professional and then until I thought I'd had enough skill.
Miller saw his dream realized when 300 was published in 1998. But back in May 1979, Frank was just a rising star, beginning what would become a legendary run on Marvel Comics' Daredevil.
I became the pencil artist on Marvel's Daredevil, and eventually I took over writing it.
He really reinvented Daredevil.
The thing that I think made Frank's run on Daredevil and Elektra so special was that Frank is a New Yorker. He lives in New York and he knows the city inside and out. So he was able to bring that kind of gritty Hell's Kitchen from first-hand experience to the Daredevil Elektra universe.
He made him a much darker character. Wrote his own material, he drew it, and he had a very earthy, hard-edged style to both his writing and to his artwork. The first time I saw his work, I said, this is a big new talent emerging.
In July 1983, Frank Miller leaves Marvel to work on an original creation, doing his own writing, penciling, and inking on Ronin, a futuristic tale set in New York City about the reincarnation of sworn enemies from feudal Japan.
Ronin is an extremely strange project. I'm amazed it was ever greenlighted, where it takes place in the future. That stuff was so strange back then. You never saw anything like that.
Well, Ronin was a joy to do. As much as I loved doing Daredevil, Ronin was scarier to work on, much more challenging, much more ambitious. I just learned a ton. I love that because it was me with reckless abandon, absorbing the Japanese and the French. It was a wild mix, and it was a reckless piece of work, but I still love it.
It's a cult graphic novel. Ronin represents for me like a bunch of classical stories all together in one. And I would love to do it, and we're talking about it.
With the publication of Ronin, Frank's popularity continues to grow, and he gets bigger and better offers.
DC Comics had been on me to do Batman for a long time, and I'd always felt too intimidated by it. I just felt like the character was too big for me. I didn't really have what it took for it. And then, one day I was just thinking about it. All of a sudden, I realized that, I was about to turn 30, and Batman was permanently 29, and I was gonna be damned if I was older than Batman. So I started concocting this story where he was in his 50s and coming out of retirement, and with a much harder edge. DC went with just about every single thing I proposed.
Coming up, Frank tells the last Batman story and dreams up a town without pity that will become his sandbox for years to come. And later, Frank writes a film script for a comic book adaptation that will never be made on Icons. DC Comics released the first issue of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and Frank once again turned the medium on its head.
Dark Knight Returns. It was another one of those times where life just felt explosive because the work was just flying at me.
It wasn't long before Hollywood sought out Frank to write a pair of sequels to Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop.
Well, RoboCop 2 was the more intense of the two for me because I was on the set every day and watched the whole process. RoboCop 3, I was a little more distant because I didn't go to the set or anything. In both cases, I learned the same lesson, though. Don't be the writer. The director's got the power. The screenplay is a fire hydrant. There's a row of dogs around the block waiting for it.
Eventually, Miller decides he's had enough.
When I just decided I couldn't handle it anymore, and went away.
Frank left one cruel city for another, putting Hollywood in the rear view and steering towards Basin City.
I'd gone through the longest period of my life not drawing, which was 2 years. And so I sat down in my new home in Hollywood. I just sat at my drawing board and decided I was going to start drawing again, and I was going to draw exactly what I wanted. Damn Hollywood. And I started Sin City. And I draw this comic book that's everything I always wanted to draw. The first three priorities were tough guys in trench coats, beautiful women, and vintage cars.
Well, Sin City is a marvelous achievement in terms of sequential art. There's a hard edge to them, there's a brutality to them. There's also a really rough beauty and an elegance to them. Sin City has been viewed as really one of the pinnacles of Frank Miller's art achievements and storytelling abilities.
And I went on for 12 years to draw my Sin City, and was absolutely in love with it.
Sin City made Frank Miller a wanted man.